Joining us now for World Brief and the review of some of the headlines of today's newspapers from around the world is Adefemi Akinsanya. Good morning.
Good morning, Dr. Rubin. Good morning, Ayo, and good morning, Rufai.
Good morning.
Rufai, I have to say my phone was very empty. I thought that after Arsenal beat Chelsea yesterday, you might have sent a word of congratulations. No, nothing. No, nothing.
Sorry.
Okay,
I was
Sarah,
out dining, so I didn't
Sarah.
see the game.
Whatever will be, will be. We're going to Wembley. Okay, Sarah, Sarah. Good morning to you viewers. Let me tell you what's happening around the world. Now, both Nigeria and the United States have confirmed a small team of American soldiers has been deployed to Nigeria. This is the first public acknowledgement of US personnel on Nigerian soil since the America-led airstrikes on suspected IS militants and targets on the 25th of December 2025, that Christmas Day attack. Now, according to General Dagvin Anderson of the US Africa Command, the deployment follows discussions between US President Donald Trump and Nigeria's President Bola Ahmed Tinubu during a meeting in Rome last year. Now, details on the size and specific mission of the team remain limited, but officials do say that it brings unique US capabilities to support Nigerian forces. Now, Nigeria's Defense Minister, General Christopher Musa, has confirmed US personnel are operating here in Nigeria, but we do await further detail on the deployment itself. What we do know is that Nigeria has been in the diplomatic crosshairs of the United States following threats by Trump to attack Nigeria over claims that Nigeria is not doing enough to protect its Christian citizens. Now, the Nigerian government has insisted that there is no Christian genocide happening in the country. Meanwhile, Plateau State Governor Caleb Mutfwang is in the United States on a strategic, economic and security mission. So during his engagement in Washington, Mutfwang met with US Representative Riley Moore, where both leaders discussed ways to deepen ties between Nigeria and the United States in areas of course, security, but also economic development and democratic governance. Now, Moore himself described the talks as meaningful and productive, saying that Washington remains committed to working with Nigeria to address shared challenges such as insecurity and the protection of vulnerable communities in the country, most especially across Nigeria's Middle Belt. Now, the governor's mission also involves meetings with key American institutions, including the US Development Finance Corporation and the Export-Import Bank, all aimed at attracting investment and boosting trade. So let's see what he comes back with. Let's move on to US foreign policy now, in the Middle East specifically. And the US military says it has shot down an Iranian drone that approached the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln in the Arabian Sea. Now, according to US Central Command, a F-35C fighter jet intercepted and destroyed the Iranian Shahed 139 drone after it continued toward the carrier despite repeated warnings, with no US personnel or equipment being harmed. Now, the incident came amid heightened tensions between Washington and Tehran, and it did spur a rise in crude oil prices as markets reacted to this escalation. Now, US officials say that the action was defensive and underscores that diplomatic talks with Iran are still in progress despite this confrontation. It's also worth noting that this drone, it's said, was performing surveillance rather than a harsh attack. We'll see what happens there. But let's wrap up today's World Brief with this update, because perhaps if anyone was expecting fireworks when Donald Trump met with Gustavo Petro, I guess they didn't quite get what they were looking for. Instead of sparks, there were smiles. And instead of tensions, a surprisingly warm exchange is what ensued. Now, both leaders praised each other's candor, joked through parts of their talks, and struck a tone that looked more like a budding friendship than a diplomatic standoff. Now, Trump called Petro direct and interesting, while the Colombian president described the meeting as constructive, saying that dialogue mattered more than differences. Now, the discussions covered trade, security, regional stability, but also it's really the chemistry between both leaders that stood out. There were no walkouts, no sharp words, just essentially, unexpectedly, cordial meeting between these two men. It is proof that in diplomacy, sometimes the headline isn't the clash everyone predicts, but really the friendship that nobody might have been expected. We'll see what happens. Let us move on to our newspaper headlines from across the world. As ever, we begin with the front page of This Day. This Day reports that the World Bank has described Nigeria as a global reference point for steady and credible economic reforms. They cited policy consistency, tough fiscal decisions, and rising investor confidence. Now, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu has pledged to sustain these reforms. Meanwhile, also on the front page of This Day this morning, This Day does report that President Tinubu has reaffirmed Nigeria's target to raise crude oil production to 3 million barrels per day by 2030. Well, we're actually staying with natural resources when we move on to the Daily Independent this morning. And the Daily Independent reports that President Tinubu has credited his administration's policies for deepening the implementation of the Petroleum Industry Act and driving energy sector reforms. Let's take a look at the New Telegraph. Now, the New Telegraph this morning reports that the United States has announced plans to deport 79 Nigerians arrested by Immigration and Customs Enforcement and listed on the Department of Homeland Security's worst of worst criminal register. Now, the DHS said that the affected individuals were convicted of offences which included rape, sexual assault, kidnapping, fraud, money laundering, drug and weapons crimes. So that's what's happening over in the United States there. Let's take a look at the Punch. So the Punch reports that at least 30 people were killed in separate bandit attacks in Katsina and Kwara states on Tuesday. Now, if we look at Katsina, the affected community is called Doma, and that's in a Faskari local government area. 20 residents, unfortunately, were killed. Homes and vehicles were set on fire. And over in Kwara, the issues happened in Woro and Nuku communities, both of them in Kayama local government area. 10 people in that case were killed during an evening assault by attackers, and it's believed that those attackers arrived from Niger State's Borgu National Park. Very, very unfortunate news there. Let's take a look at the Daily Trust. This was a really eye-opening read, so I implore you always, well, you're supposed to read all of the newspapers, but definitely take a look at this story today. So the Daily Trust reports that high treatment costs and limited access to care are forcing many Nigerian cancer patients to turn to herbal remedies. Now, there are only 10 functional radiotherapy centers in Nigeria, and there's also a shortage of oncologists. These are specific cancer doctors, cancer professionals, as well as the fact that we're seeing more cases of late detection. It continues to remain common. Meanwhile, when we look at the existing centers we've got the Turai Yaradua Cancer Center in Abuja. It has remained largely inactive for 16 years. Well, 16 years really after its establishment. And when we look at the National Institute for Cancer Research and Treatment, it is trying to develop local clinical trials and cancer drugs by 2027. But really, these articles just open your eyes into how stark the situation really is. Well, from Nigerian papers, let's move on to African ones. We've got the Daily Nation of Kenya. And as we're looking ahead to Kenya preparing for its own general elections, what we're seeing is that the fate of the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission's chief executive, a man named Marjan Hussein Marjan, this gentleman here, essentially what this article is saying is that his fate was sealed following a crisis meeting of commissioners that led to his premature exit from office. Now, the paper says that his tenure was actually supposed to end next year. It's 5 years long, but it's believed that they decided to essentially get rid of him sooner because they were really concerned about how he would lead their own version of the Electoral Commission ahead of the elections next year. So let's move on to our next African paper. We do have the Libya Herald this morning. It's not a paper that we've taken before, but this was quite a big news story. So the Libya Herald reports that Saif al-Islam Gaddafi, he is the 53-year-old son of former Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi, and once a prominent political figure in the country. He was actually shot and killed by unidentified gunmen at his residence in Zintan over in western Libya. Now, his death does come amid Libya's ongoing political turmoil, and also Libya is preparing to go to elections in a few weeks. So this is just another example to see democracy and just voting across the African continent just not at its healthiest. Moving on to our UK papers. So the UK papers, as you can imagine, still on this Epstein leak. So you've got got the UK Guardian, and it is leading with allegations that Peter Mandelson, who is now resigned his peerage, he's no longer a lord. There are accusations that he leaked sensitive government information to Jeffrey Epstein, and those allegations have prompted the Metropolitan Police in the United Kingdom in London to launch a criminal investigation. So very serious things there. And when we look at the Daily Express, it does lead with the fact that Prince Edward, who is the younger brother of Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, he's urged the people to remember the victims of Jeffrey Epstein. Well, I mean, we don't know what the status of their relationship is there, but clearly very, very stark words there. So those are your newspaper headlines and your brief. Love to hear your thoughts.
So, you see, the cancer story really caught me because I do a lot of work with my charity outfit as regards people that have cancer.
Yes.
Femi, depending on the kind of cancer you have, to do 2 cycles of chemotherapy in this country will set you back about 20 million naira. Oh. And that money is totally out of pocket payment. Yeah. Funding with insurance might be very iffy for you. So that's the plight. Yeah. That's what you will have expected the government to invest in rather than running what I call a casino economy. And it's obvious. What President Tinubu is running is a casino economy. What's a casino economy? An economy that has a lot of financial engineering, big on numbers. That's why they'll keep telling you about the reserves. World Bank numbers, high growth, 1 trillion economy. You're barely doing 255 billion GDP, but you're talking about 1 trillion economy. Hypervolating language, that's casino economy. But they are low on real value, which is productivity.
Yes.
Agricultural production, output, manufacturing production. A country that truly works for businesses. I mean, look at most of the banks taking impairments on loans mostly from businesses. It shows that businesses cannot even service their loan because things are tough in the economy. So rather than President Tinubu running a casino economy, this is what we should focus on because that's what we're running. That's why we're always about the headlines, big numbers. As regards Trump, you see, if Iran said they were doing a recce as regards around the American warship, around their waters, Iran has a right to do a recce around its territory. Yeah. You quickly blowing their drone is also an act of aggression. But the surprising thing for me about Trump is how I tend not to understand his lies. 1 minute, you are saying we should talk about a new deal, Iranian nuclear deal. But correct me if I'm wrong, Femi. Is this not you that you say your B-2 bombers obliterated every Iranian nuclear facilities?
That's what they said.
So if you said your B-2 bombers, and we counter that story by saying the recce that came out said you didn't obliterate their nuclear.
Yes,
so if you claim
damage, but not completely.
If you claim that you obliterated a nuclear, why do you need to talk about them? Why? You know there were recently talks in Ankara, in Turkey, between the American and the Iranian effort. So why do you need to talk to them about nuclear weapons when you say your B-2 bombers obliterated most of their installation? So this is the dynamics I cannot understand about Trump and about America. In general. As regards their troops on ground, I'm probably sure it's recce. I'm not sure there's any intense boots on ground. Recce and training, probably that'll be the order of the day. That's what I think.
Well, on that one, I think what's curious is that they haven't told us how long they've been here and the remit of their station here. In fact, what some people are now touting, because when you have information that's not complete, is that it then leaves room for misinformation or disinformation. They're saying, oh, America is trying to go through the back door to have a base in Nigeria as part of its African its presence on the African continent. So maybe perhaps, and this is where I talk about Nigeria owning that conversation. If it's a partnership, a collaboration, then Nigeria also ought to be speaking. Yesterday, the US Africa Command had a briefing with some journalists, and they were able to share some of course, not in detail, hiding some information, but share some of their what they've been up to recently. And part of that is where this announcement came around, the fact that they did have boots on ground here in Nigeria. What it was for specifically was not highlighted. I think just to mention that. And we don't know whether they've been here before or after that Christmas Day strike. Now, going on to Peter Mandelson in the United Kingdom, that's big news. And the reason why is because now so many people are coming out being linked to Jeffrey Epstein, and I wonder why the man had to die. Because I feel like he would have had a lot of, he would have been very critical to the conversations, prosecutions today that's happening. But the critical part of what happened with Peter Mandelson, whom you've now said has resigned, is the fact that he was leaking government secrets to Epstein. And what, I want to ask is that to what extent did he have powers over these people who were willing to compromise, even at that very high level? Because his colleagues who served with him at the time are talking about treacherous behavior. He betrayed their trust. He was literally sending, insider trading. In some ways, he had mentioned when the government was going to release assets that they were going to sell in the next few days. He was discussing classified information with Epstein, and these are some of the areas that could be very well criminal if it's if it reaches the threshold of criminal activities. Finally, today's World Cancer Day, and I'm glad that you highlighted that story, especially because we've been talking about this for many years. In fact, I recall there was a time, it was Honorable Orode Uduagan who had a foundation for cancer at the time, and she raised money to buy equipment. Do you know that years later, a year after when she went back to the hospital, they hadn't even opened the nylon because they didn't have technicians who were qualified enough to operate the machines. So you see the level of challenges that we have. But today, I also want to take out time to celebrate survivors who have come out, who are fighting, who are raising awareness, talking about early detection being key and ensuring that prevention is hopefully better than cure, especially in Nigeria, because if it comes onset and it's aggressive, then it becomes almost too late to do anything about it.
Okay, I had the question, why did Jeffrey Epstein have to die? Well, he committed suicide. August 2019. He was said to have, hanged himself with a bed sheet.
Yes,
that's
in his jail cell.
However, in the light
that's the story, that's the official line.
However, in the light of current developments, we have not even had the last about Jeffrey Epstein, considering the personalities that are involved. One other story that we have talked about this morning is about Abubakar Malami being arraigned, along with his son on a 5-count charge. Now, one of those charges says, as Attorney General of the Federation, he did not prosecute persons who are terrorists. Well, I'm a bit worried about how they are going to push that, because under Section 174 of the Constitution, the powers of the Attorney General are discretionary. He can initiate a case, he can withdraw a case, he can stop a particular case. However, on the other 2 cases that they have about possession of arms and about, declaration of assets, now government may be more on terra firma. But as you have always said, one, we should restrain from media trial, and that the accused persons are entitled to fair trial, so that, it doesn't look like, politicization of a process. Quickly, on Trump and Petro. Gustavo Petro, the president of Colombia, and President Trump, they've been having crisis since October 2025, leading to the United States withdrawing the U.S. visa of Petro when he went to the United States, and he said American soldiers should not listen to Donald Trump, and also sanctions against Colombia, and then both leaders are abusing each other. And against that background, sanctions were also placed on Colombia. Aid to the tune of about 20%, was stopped against Colombia. And also tariffs against Colombia were increased. And now, after Venezuela, President Trump says, Petro is now, trying to make peace with us. Otherwise, things will happen to him. So they met yesterday, as you reported, previously. And it turned out to be a peaceful meeting.
Yes.
People expected that Gustavo Petro, who also likes to talk, and who is also a leftist, will be Zelensky, but it was not Zelensky. So the talk is made jolly about narcotics, narco-terrorism support, and also about how to lift the sanctions. And I think, the basic thing is about Trump or the United States trying to control the whole of that area in line with the manifest destiny of the United States as they define it and as they have defined it consistently over the years. As for Iran, well, the good news there is that both countries say they will continue to speak. America wants a deal over nuclear project of Iran. Iran says the project is for civilian purposes. Well, last year, what we know, that there was the 12-day war with Israel. Iran lost out of that. America intervened. Iran also lost out of that. But we do not expect that there will be, another war in that region because persecution, the president of Iran and the foreign minister, they're saying that if America attacks Iran, then there will be a regional war. Yeah. Regional war will have wider implications for global peace, the kind that we do not anticipate. Exactly. Even if commodity-reliant countries like Nigeria will be happy if the spot price of crude oil goes up, but at the end of the day, what do we do?
Well, you suffer it in the local market. What do we do?
What do we do with what we gain from spot price of crude oil going up internationally? So there are many contradictions and many things to worry about. Thank you very much, Adefemi.
Right. Thank you so much, Adefemi. I want us to end on a very happy note, and that is a congratulations to Arsenal. If they won't give us our flowers, we'll take it.
Final. We're going to a quadruple. We're going to do it.
Do it.
I want to say that this is a foretaste of our celebration when we finally win the EPL. Congratulations, my fellow Gunner.
All
right, let's thank you so much, Adefemi. See you again tomorrow.